As Christians, we have to understand and be real with where we are.
That's what we have to see first, individually.
And where our mindset is and what we desire.
Airing the Addisons.
I think what God is really calling us back to, it's those individual personal revivals in our own lives where we're like, oh Lord, what have we done? We have minimized you.
Promoting truth, wisdom, and empowerment.
As the church, man, we should be on the forefront of making disciples, of indoctrination and godly things.
If we don't train our kids, they will not be able to stand.
Airing the Addisons.
On American Family Radio, thank you so much for listening. I'm Meeke.
And I'm Wil.
And J-Mac is on tap to help us navigate this show. We are talking about what it is to parent well, the aim and the goal of hearing well done as a parent from the Lord, that we serve the Lord in every area of our lives, all aspects of our lives. We are submitted to his lordship and we are found serving him. And that includes parenting. One of the things that we want to do is open the program with just kind of sharing and talking through how the Lord has really, I would say, challenged us and provoked us to take our eyes off what the world really defines or characterizes as success. As far as children are concerned, and to see the eternal goal, like to be looking ahead. So, Wil the Great, if I were to ask you, what is the one thing that you would say motivates the way that you father? I'm going to use father as a verb. What would you say is the one thing that motivates the way that you father? What would you say?
I would say wanting my children to understand, who they believe in as far as God is concerned, because they have made professions. But I just, at the heart level, we want them to have the faith that is their own. Yeah. And so what motivates me to live in such a way and also to instruct in such a way is that what they have received, what they have professed would be real and lived out in their lives. So first and foremost, because I think once I'm gone, the legacy that I want to leave behind is a legacy of godliness for real. Yes. Like where it's not just churchianity, or it's not just I grew up in church, so that's why I go to church, but a real faith that is their own. And I know that's not something that I can make happen, but I think living in front of them a life of authentic Christianity, it helps them to see, man, this is real. And this is something that my parents not only told us about, but they lived out.
I think the faith that you're describing really is the only type of faith that will pass down transgenerationally. Yeah. I think what you're describing is a genuine faith. It's a faith that is not just cultural. It's not just part of a habit. It's not just a social thing. But it's true, excuse me, and it's genuine. Yeah. And then the kid is compelled to actually pass that faith down to his or her kids. Exactly. And so then you have Psalm 78 that you've preached on, taught on so many times, where you have multiple generations affected by that.
That's right. Where they'll pass it down to their children and the children's children. That's what we should desire. And I know it's important for us to leave a legacy of, having success, and, people want to leave money and stuff behind, which is a good thing. But man, to leave behind a spiritual legacy that's passed on, that long after I'm gone, still the Addisons are operating in godliness. Yeah. To me, that is worth it all.
Yeah. Amen. I think about even in my own life, and I would say if someone would ask me the same question that I asked you, my answer would be very similar to yours. Like that is exactly my motivation, my desire is that our kids would receive the gospel intact, that it would truly be their faith, that they would have a genuine faith in the Lord Jesus Christ, a faith that motivates all of the disciplines, all of what it is to be a disciple, to be a follower of Christ, that would be evident in their life. And then the follow-up question would be, so then what are we doing to secure that? Like, what are we doing to get to that point? And I think about my own life, and then I'll volley the question over to you. And it really does come down to one word, and that word is sacrifice. There are many things, and I say this not as a lament, but I say this as a celebration of the conviction that the Lord gives by his Spirit. There are many things that we have given up. There are many things that we've refused to chase after, to go after, that this world would say, you could do this, you could do that. I've had people specifically, especially in media and all, I've had people specifically, oh, you could be doing this. Don't you know you could do this? And all you got to do, and we could do. And I think, but is that going to take me away from my kids? Is that going to make me too busy to shape character? Is that going to remove from me the opportunity to disciple and train my kids? Which, by the way, we talk a lot about homeschooling. The reason we homeschool our kids is not primarily just for their like schooling. Right? It's not primarily just for what you might define as education, or what one might define as education. We are with them. We educate them at home because we want to disciple them. We want to make robust followers of the Lord Jesus Christ. And I think about if more of us as parents would shift our thinking on what it is to be successful as a parent. Because I think when we start to think about what it is to be successful, we have really different definitions than what biblically might be described as successful.
Yeah. And you know, when we get together, you talk about those priorities. You know, I've gotten together with people, and when they talk about their children, they talk about, you know, the job that they have and, you know, what they're doing, because that's a high priority. Now, you know, that's a good thing, you know, if they have a nice job and all of that. But man, I feel like, man, are they living for the Lord?
Yeah.
Because you can have all of that, but still, you know, not be living for God. And so I think our priorities have to be centered around that. And I think you say sacrificial living, in the sense of our children should see us living in a way that is professing godliness.
Yeah.
You know, I really believe that's the number one way that it passes down into an authentic relationship for them, is they see it before them in a real way, and not being a hypocrite or things like that, but really seeing their parents live it out, and more than even what they're saying, seeing it in their lives. And so we have to practice that.
You know, it's interesting because as we are living this conviction of wanting to pass the gospel down intact to our kids and wanting to disciple and shape character, I have found that there are times that in all of our doing, it will overlap, that we will say, hey, the reason that we're doing this, like there are times, and it usually, you know, can be provoked by them even asking a question or wondering, you know, our kids will say, and just frankly, they will say, we understand that Christians are different in this world. But then they will say, why do we have to be different from those people who are Christians? Like, they're like, why do we have to do it this way? Like, why can't we just be like other Christians? And so because of that question, then we go into, well, listen, this is what God has called us to. We're not just Christians in name only. We're not just trying to, you know, get through this thing and spend eternity with the Lord. Yeah, we are looking forward to that, but we want to be faithful here in the meantime. We want to live for the glory of God.
Amen.
And so that requires that we're not going to do everything in the same way that everybody is doing it. Why? Because God calls us to a life that is set apart, a life that is different. And often, even in a Christian context where I would say a lot of what we're surrounded by, and so many of our listeners know this and we lament this, but a lot of what we're surrounded by is cultural Christianity. It's just, I grew up in church. And so a lot of what we see infiltrating the church is just cultural Christianity. We've got to be parents who are going to pull our kids away from the cultural Christianity cycle and say, hey, what about a sincere devotion to God? Hey, what about living out and expressing this character that has been shaped and transformed by a genuine encounter with Christ?
And it's something that you mentioned, you know, that even amongst Christians, you have to say, hey, we may be even different from other Christians. I think that's a sad commentary. But at the same time, I'm thinking about the scripture, many scriptures, and I've talked about this before, how, you know, when the children of Israel were coming out of a place and God had delivered, and God told the parents, hey, you need to do this and show them this and say this, because when your children ask you a question like, why do we do this? And why, you know, you'll say, because God brought us out of Egypt. We were once slaves. And I think that's how we are to live right now. You know, our children should ask us those questions like, why do we go to church? Why do we, you know, do this? And why do we live in this way? Well, that's the on-ramp, like I say, for the gospel to say, hey, because I was once lost and God saved me. And now my life is dedicated towards him. My allegiance is to him. And, you know, I want the same for you. And so even in our homes, there's a natural flow of the gospel that can be presented, just by the questions that our children ask.
Man, that's so good. And you're referring to, I'm thinking of Deuteronomy chapter 6, where the Lord has given all of his statutes and he's told his people to keep these statutes. And the admonition is that in the time to come, as you keep all of these statutes and as you obey all of the Lord's commands, that your kids will ask why. They will ask why you're doing these things. And in other words, you think about it, it's just the point that you're making here. Why are you so different and distinct from all of these other cultures around us?
Right.
Why are you guys doing things that way? Or better, why are you not doing those things? Everybody's doing those things. Why are you not doing those things? It opens the door for us to not only share the gospel, but to give our testimony, making much of Jesus Christ, like saying, because the Lord saved me.
Yeah.
Because I was once a slave to sin. Like just, you parallel that and you think of the Jews who were slaves in Egypt, and they were told by the Lord that you are to tell your kids that you were once slaves in Egypt, but God brought you out. And you think about how that compares to our testimony as Christians, that we were once slaves to sin, doing whatever it is that our flesh wanted to do, but the Lord saved us. And so now, out of our allegiance and our great love for him, we live differently. Amen. We do differently. We miss this opportunity with our kids, frankly, because we don't live differently. Yeah. And so we don't provoke the question.
Yeah. And that was something that was supposed to be passed down as a memorial, and it's amazing to think about that, because that means that the ones that came out of the on the dry land, those ones were supposed to pass down what God had done all the way down to like King David and everybody else, like this is supposed to be something that was known throughout. And if we had a habit of doing that in our families, it said Grandpa Will, God saved him at, this age and he lived for the Lord. And then, son JD, God saved him. And that should be passed down. What a legacy. That's something to be happy about, that there's a godly legacy. And we know that even in life, there are different legacies. He was known for this. He was known for that. Yeah. Man, to be known for fidelity to God. I mean, I think that's awesome.
I think at one time in our country, among believers, I think that was something that was prized. I think at one time it was treasured to have kids who follow Jesus, even to have a child go into ministry, like that the Lord would call that kid into ministry. Right. And something shifted where our desires and our affections in this country went through an overhaul, where we saw stuff and things and notoriety and, what we define as temporal success, right? We saw those things as more important. And when those things became more important, then the way we got to those things shifted, right? When those things became more important than a godly legacy, then we began to do things differently. So we had more pursuits of the things of this world.
Yeah, and that's what we saw in the culture. So the church kind of followed the culture of this world, because think about it. For someone to be a pastor at a certain point in time in this country, that was highly respected.
Absolutely.
That person was seen as delivering the word of God, having a certain type of standard that he was living by. Yep. So as the culture shifted, I think that the church kind of shifted with it, and so the things that were important, to the church then are not so important now, that it's more the things of this world. And that's something that we have to guard against. We should have at high priority the things that God have at high priority. And if we don't, we can say, Lord, help me, to be in line with what you desire.
Yeah. And I'm going to say this, because our culture, our American culture, has grown to be so enmeshed with the church, it's going to feel like we're doing something that just isn't done. Yeah. It's almost going to seem like you're gypping your kid by not pushing your kid toward these secular pursuits, because it's just the way people have done things, right? Yeah. It's American culture. Yeah. But what I'm saying is, what about if we grab hold of the Christian culture? What if we grab hold of the culture of Scripture that teaches us a new way to live, an eternal way to live? I think if we can grab that, it really will change the way we parent. It will change our desires at the very least. But I think the outflow of that is that it's also going to change the way we parent. We're going to grab the break. When we come back on the other side of the grape, on the other side of the break, Tim Alba joins us. We're going to talk about his book, Well Done, Mom and Dad. A practical guide to turn good intentions into godly legacies. You're not going to want to miss that conversation. This is Aaron the Addisons on American Family Radio. We'll take the break and be right back.
As Christians, it can be overwhelming when we see the darkness that surrounds us. It makes us wonder, what can I do about it? And that is what Reverend Don Wildman wanted to know. It was 1977, and the violence and crude joking on national television was worse than ever before, until one preacher from Mississippi decided to do something about it.
For the past 5 years, you have dedicated a major part of your life to cleaning up television.
This is basically all we've done for the last 5 years.
This grassroots effort continued to grow, and soon the American Family Association was born. The Stand is a monthly resource filled with articles to educate and inform your family. American Family Radio has 180 outlets. It brings news, talk shows, ministry programs, and encouragement to a vast audience, 24 hours a day. For those looking for news from a Christian perspective, American Family News is a trusted online resource. 1 Million Moms is a division that helps families communicate with decision makers in the entertainment and advertising industry so that their voices can be heard. American Family Studios produces films, documentaries, video curriculum, and other resources to uplift, inspire, and encourage families. The AFA streaming platform hosts all AFA-produced video content that address the issues of our day related to marriage, family, the sanctity of life, and more. And AFA Action seeks to mobilize individuals by providing resources like the iVoter Guide and giving individuals an opportunity to do something about what they believe. The work that began over 40 years ago continues only through the faithful prayers, donations, and actions of our supporters. To these we say thank you. And to others, we invite you to join with us and make a difference.
This is Airing the Addisons on American Family Radio.
Welcome back to Aaron the Addisons on American Family Radio. It always happens. I don't know what happens. We come back and here I am. I'm Meeke.
And I'm Will.
And joining us now to discuss his book, Well Done, Mom and Dad, A Practical Guide to Turn Good Intentions into Godly Legacies, is Tim Alba, who is a CFO and executive pastor and author, and has taken his experience in the business world and his experience at home and turned that into a ministry to help families parent for the glory of God. Amen. He and his wife, Anna, actually have this ministry that operates from, you can check out the website, timalba.com to learn more about that, timalba.com. We're going to get right into it. Tim, thank you for joining us.
Oh, it's a privilege. Thank you.
So I was hoping that we could just kind of dive right into this. I mean, we are in the thick of parenting. Our oldest is 15, right on down to 2. So we'll be at this for quite a minute, it seems like. But I'm hoping that you can start by defining for us what well done parenting is. What does well done parenting look like or entail?
Well, first I'd say congratulations and strap on, right, for the age of your kids.
Yeah.
Sure.
Well done parenting, if I may, has really been a journey for me because I didn't start out to write a parenting book. I was writing a book for my children. I was trying to figure out how do I help my children learn how to be faithful, but more importantly, want to for their own, right? Because we can instruct them, we can do all these things. But until we are able to instill in them a want to for faithfulness, it doesn't tend to stick. So for me, it's really been a journey of transitioning from being essentially who my dad was, as great as he was, to becoming what my children needed to become faithful, to want that. Wow. So I really walked through this journey of essentially transitioning from the parent that I preferred to be by default to the parent that my children needed me to be. So I talk about two kinds of Christian parents, the default parents, great parents, right? They're great intentions, but we live just crisis to crisis, getting through today. They try to break little Susie's habits and fix her behavior and stop her drama. But the problem is that well-intended is not well done. And I had to learn how to become a student of my kids and transition, if you will, to what I just simply call it being a well-done parent. We still see Susie as our precious child, but I began to see my children differently as the godly adults they could become. So I began to learn how to break little Susie's habits by bonding with her heart, and to fix her behavior by funneling her beliefs, and to help stop her endless drama at times by helping shape her dreams. And it really comes down to me with well-done parenting is looking past the crisis of today and imagining the day that not only we stand before the Lord and hear him say, well done, and receive that embrace, but imagining what it looks like when we get to see the Lord do that with our children.
Wow.
That visual changed everything for me and my family and my children, and we can't make them do it, right? We can't make our kids be faithful, but we can sure do our best to make it easy for them to want to. And ultimately, when I began a journey from telling my kids to trying and instilling those values in my children, it literally changed my family. And boy, I had no plans to write a book, but I can tell you, I began to see how so many Christian parents want that, but how few people today know how do you turn those good intentions into a godly legacy.
So good.
So you talk about parenting in a certain way. How did you even come to the realization that, man, something has to be different? Did something happen in life, or just a realization that you had that you said, like, hey, I need to do this a different way? Like, how did you even get to the point where you got to?
Well, honestly, I'd say I'm still on the journey, right? But what I saw is I began to see my children respond in ways that were different than how I responded. I wanted to be like my dad. My dad's an incredible godly man, but he's strong and stoic. But I began to realize that my kids need something different. Okay. It wasn't necessarily one great epiphany of, oh, my goodness, but there's lots of stories in the books of so many things I did right and so many things I didn't do so right. But ultimately, I learned through my children, through trying to engage them in practical, fun ways of what I talk about. Frankly, it doesn't sound fun, but it can be if you really become intentional. How do you take vision, character, and culture and turn those into things that our children want? I mean, I can tell you story for story, but I'll just tell you one is that we went through this exercise. It's called 50-25-1, and I can talk about that if you'd like.
Yes,
but ultimately, when my children, I take my youngest son, Caleb, when Caleb went through this, and I had him, he was a teenager who wouldn't hardly talk to me. He'd grunt on occasion. But at the end of this exercise, just a simple little family exercise that I tell people how to try it too, is I learned that my son needed me to be vulnerable. What? If I made a list of 100 things, vulnerability would never have cracked the top 100. It never crossed my mind. But what I had to learn to do is I had to learn to become vulnerable, because that's what would help my son. It penetrated his heart to be open to all these other things I was trying to help him with wanting to become faithful himself. I mean, it'll change your family, I promise you, when you do some of these things, because you're connecting with your kids and not just trying to instruct them with great biblical teaching. As great as that is, our kids need more. They need us to become students of them so they can want the very things we're trying to instill in them.
You know, Tim, I think that so many parents who are listening to this conversation right now, and I think that you really have kind of struck at the desire that parents have, and that is for the practicality of parenting. You know, there's so many of us that we're like, yeah, I get it. And I want to shape my kid's heart. I want my kids' desires to be righteous desires. First and foremost, I want them to choose Christ. I want to be able to pass the faith down to them. But you are very practical in this book, and you walk with parents through this journey that was yours, that is yours, as you say, it's still an ongoing. But I'm wondering if there are some practical steps that you can share, maybe expand on the 50-25-1 and talk to parents about, you know, kind of how we posture ourselves to get the results that we really do desire.
Yeah, and I'll just say, you know, I'm giving examples and trying to be practical and, frankly, vulnerable in this to help people know it is a journey. I mean, you're going to have some missteps, but I've said kids will forgive almost anything except a pattern of hypocrisy and a failure to try. And we can talk about that more. But just the 50-25-1 is just an exercise. But I can tell you, it changed my family. It really did. And it's a simple way to try to create a family vision and a personal vision to help you and your children and your spouse, whatever you single parent, whatever your situation is to choose your treasures so that you can then treasure them. So you can turn what is into what can be. And it's as simple as this. You literally start with, and if you go to the website, just saying, or you get my free workbook, whatever. I'm just trying to help people do this.
Sure.
And what you do is you pick 50 things that make you happy. It can be family, faith, food, I don't care, whatever it is. You have 50 things. 50 things you'll pour into your life funnel that make you happy. And then you narrow those down to those 50 pursuits down to 20 priorities that you sacrifice for. And then you take those things you actually do sacrifice for, those 20 priorities, narrow that down to 5 passions you'll live for and 1 purpose that you simply will not live without. Because what pours out of your life is going to pour into your children. If you want something different to pour out of your children, you need to go back and look at what you're pouring into your life. And when Caleb, I'll talk about him again, my youngest son, he was a teenager. Everybody did their list separate. But when Caleb did his, I could almost get emotional thinking about it. 24 of his 50 were almost the same as mine.
Wow.
We talked, he had his grandmother's enchiladas. This is not rocket science. Grandma's enchiladas. But he also had things like making your father proud. We talked about the same things, turns out in different ways. I always say, never forget the privilege of serving him. And I had no idea. Caleb wrote one of his top 50 was never forgetting your encounter at the cross. 10 years after we did this, my children surprised me at Christmas and updated their list. And they gave me new 50, 25 ones 10 years or so after we did this. Now, their lives were completely different. They're 10 years older. But what I couldn't believe was that, yes, their pursuits changed of all the things they're letting into their life. But those passions and that purpose didn't change hardly at all because I had helped them decide as young kids what would they choose for themselves. And my kids are goofy, too. We all have our things we wish they do differently. But if I may say, the thing I'm proudest about my children is that the character that they've chosen, because they've chosen this faithfulness for themselves. Oh. And I couldn't be prouder of that one thing that is theirs. It's not just mom and mine. It's theirs.
That's so good. That's so good. I want to back up here because I think that in order to get to these pursuits and to get to what becomes the practical approach to parenting, you point out something that I think so many of us as parents, we don't realize this is happening. And you begin the book with an illustration that you've got a house that's on fire. Your family is safely out. What's the first thing that you grab? It's such a jolting illustration, right? And I think many parents think that in life, just following this illustration that you open with, we think that we are grabbing those treasures that we intend to grab. But so much of it is really kind of what's at hand, what's the first thing that we see. And almost we find that parenting is sort of driving us, right? Like we're sort of being controlled. I think a good way to describe that is the tyranny of the urgent. So how do we choose our treasures? How do we, forgive the expression, take parenting by the horns rather than be chased down by those horns?
Yeah, I wish there was an easy answer to that, but the point of it is it is a challenge, but what a joy. It can be a real joy. We just have to get out of the if I may, we have to get out of this crisis mode. I call it potty training, training wheels, training bras, and driver's training. There's always something going on.
That's good, yeah.
There's always something. Here's what I really believe, and I again, not to talk about the book exclusively, but it's just practical ways to help parents do something that their kids can connect with. For example, I'll give you a couple of things if you want, maybe a story or two. You help me know what you'd like. But one of the things that changed me is when I began to realize my kids need a character hero. They love superheroes and all that stuff, but they need a character hero in mom or dad who's going to instill the character in them, speak character over them, and celebrate the character already within them. They need me to see in them what they can be. So I call it steering their rudder. I'm sorry, it's nudging their rudder, not steering their ship. kids don't need us to come in and tell them everything to do. We need to help nudge them. So I'll give you an example. It's just one of the examples, but it's an exercise that I promise you can be simple and fun for anybody. I've done this at work. I call it secret sauce, nothing fancy, and I give people a few hundred examples, but you pick one character quality from each of the letters, right? So 26. Mine are authentic, beliefs, choices, devoted, family, encourager. I mean, you just pick one from each letter, and each of my children did that with their spouse or at that time engaged. Each family unit picked their A to Z character qualities, 26 of them. And you talk about a fun time to see what your kids value. Wow. I mean, unbelievable to see the uniquenesses of your children and yet the commonalities of a family. And when we did this, a quick story is we did this as a family, went on vacation, had my kids do it all, and we got together and everybody shared their list and laughed and made fun of each other, right? And we incredible bonding time. And at the end of it, my daughter announced that she was pregnant with our first grandchild. Wow, what a moment. 7 months later, she gave birth to Cade Boulder Medlin. We call him Cade the Bold. And after he was born, about a month or two later, here's what struck me. Meeke, I can't tell you how much this still moves me. Her B word was bold. I have a grandson who's named after one of the character qualities that she and her husband chose for her child. And I can't promise grandchildren out of this exercise, but what I can promise you is that it'll change your family because they need practical ways for mom and or dad to come alongside and help them see how this is something that they can do. And this is something that isn't just, right, you got to model it, but your children need more than someone who just models it. They need to understand, why would you choose this? And why would they want that too? So anyway, I have lots of stories, but
I want them all.
Of how do you make it practical?
Yeah. No, that's exactly right. I mean, you're right in the vein of what we want, the ways that we want to encourage parents. Let me just remind our listeners that the book is Well Done, Mom and Dad, a practical guide to turn good intentions into godly legacies. Author of that book is Tim Alba, and we're talking the practical guide to turn good intentions into godly legacies, because I think, and sometimes we look at what's going on in the culture, and I think so many of us think that parents have just completely checked out. But I think that there's probably a fair amount of parents who we are desiring something. We think we are going after that, but really we're just kind of, caught up in the cycle of the day. This is, you do this day in and day out. And I think it's incumbent upon us to recognize that, break that cycle. There's a quote here, and I want to get you to talk about this just a little bit. Well, before I do that, Tim, where can our listeners pick up a copy of your book?
You can get it on Amazon or on my website. That's either way works great.
Okay, so you could go to timalba.com, or you can pick up a copy over at Amazon. But here's the quote, and I want to get you to talk around this for a little bit. The proof of what matters most isn't the dream you'll pursue to be happy. It's the dream you'll sacrifice to be faithful.
Yeah.
I hear the music here, so I know that the break is going to grab us. But can you just get us started, kind of open the box so that we can start to unpack that a little bit?
Yeah, we want our children to carry on a godly legacy, but we have to know that godly legacies aren't allowed. They have to be created. So we have to decide, what are we going to sacrifice for? What are we desperate for? And what will we depend upon God for? And when we help our children and ourselves choose that, it's not about what we're pursuing. It's what would God call you to do, and what will you lay down? What will you give him that you can lay at his feet one day when you meet the Savior? And help your children to lay down their crown. What are you willing to give up? I've met parents who give up anything for this kind of godly legacy.
Let me jump in. We'll grab the break and be right back.
As Christians, it can be overwhelming when we see the darkness that surrounds us. It makes us wonder, what can I do about it? And that is what Reverend Don Wildman wanted to know. It was 1977, and the violence and crude joking on national television was worse than ever before, until one preacher from Mississippi decided to do something about it.
For the past 5 years, you have dedicated a major part of your life to cleaning up television.
This is basically all we've done for the last 5 years.
This grassroots effort continued to grow, and soon the American Family Association was born. The Stand is a monthly resource filled with articles to educate and inform your family. American Family Radio has 180 outlets. It brings news, talk shows, ministry programs, and encouragement to a vast audience, 24 hours a day. For those looking for news from a Christian perspective, American Family News is a trusted online resource. 1 Million Moms is a division that helps families communicate with decision makers in the entertainment and advertising industry so that their voices can be heard. American Family Studios produces films, documentaries, video curriculum, and other resources to uplift, inspire, and encourage families. The AFA streaming platform hosts all AFA-produced video content that address the issues of our day related to marriage, family, the sanctity of life, and more. And AFA Action seeks to mobilize individuals by providing resources like the iVoter Guide and giving individuals an opportunity to do something about what they believe. The work that began over 40 years ago continues only through the faithful prayers, donations, and actions of our supporters. To these we say thank you. And to others, we invite you to join with us and make a difference.
Airing the Addisons, promoting truth, wisdom, and empowerment on American Family Radio.
Welcome back to Airing the Addisons on American Family Radio. We appreciate you listening. I'm Meeke.
And I'm Will.
And our guest today is Tim Alba. He's the author of the book, Well Done, Mom and Dad, a practical guide to turn good intentions into godly legacies. And the break grabbed us at the end of the last segment, which so often happens.
Yeah.
But I want to pick up where we left off before we went to the break. Tim, we were talking about the sacrifices that parents are willing to make. When we talk about passing down the faith intact to our children, and then we start to ask the question, what is it that we are willing to sacrifice? How do we drive home the importance of that for our parents listening today?
I'm a financial guy, and I think I'll give you a financial comparison to this, is as in investing, you have to decide up front what you're trying to accomplish. And here's a quick example. If you invest $1 for 1 day, after 50 years at 1% interest, it's worth $1.64. If you'll invest $1 a day, each day, for 50 years, but it draws 10% interest, it's worth over $467,000. And here's what I tell parents. What would your kids look like at 50 years old if you invested in something in them every day that drew their interest? And I'll give you a quick example, is that we went through this exercise with my kids, and I thought, what would my teenage son, who won't hardly talk to me or his mother, what connects with him? And we are in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. He loves Dallas Mavericks. So I took him to Dallas Mavericks games. It worked great for like 3 times, and then he got bored with it. And I'm thinking, great. That was a waste of money and time and whatever. and we did this exercise, though, and it was like 5 years later. And I through this exercise, they were sharing with me what mattered most to them of their memories growing up. And on my son's list was Dallas Mavericks tickets. Wow. And I'm thinking, why would a son have one of the greatest memories of his life be Dallas Mavericks basketball tickets for games he didn't go to? It's because he knew his dad was finding time of a crazy schedule to spend time with him at something that mattered to him. And my point is to parents, please don't stop investing. Don't let your investment be dependent upon their reaction, because you will find out many years later what really mattered to you, because no kid's going to say, thanks, Mom, for molding my character, for making tough decisions and always trying to pour into me. No, seriously? But when she's 33 or 43, she'll look back and go, thanks, Mom. I know now how you kept pouring into me. That's what we're trying to is to parent for our children when they're 33 and 43, not when they're 3 or they're 13. You can't parent for their happiness when they're teenagers. You hope that they're happy, but man, I wanted holiness I hoped for happiness, but I wanted holiness that became theirs.
That's so good.
That's interesting, because I'm thinking about a memory I had with my dad. Like, so I don't really enjoy baseball, but I remember as a kid, he took me to an Astros game when we were in Texas. And even to this day, that's one of the memories that stick out in my mind, not because of the baseball game, but because just me and him, just both of us being together and doing that. And so, man, that's amazing. I just thought back to that as you were saying that.
You know, Tim, there are so many things that compete for, I guess, what we would see as necessary as parents. And sometimes it's really difficult to wade through all of that. How do we, as parents who want to be faithful, who want to hear from the Lord, well done, how do we reduce all of the obligations and all of the demands that we have on our life? I would imagine, being a CFO, that's pretty demanding. I would imagine. How do you reduce all of those demands, or how does one do that so that we can focus on what is important, what is of eternal value?
Well, what a great question. I'll give you a story, and I tend to think in terms of stories. And I think back to when I was the day before my 17th birthday, and I was working on a farm, putting bales of hay on a conveyor. How boring. And I'm just putting these bales on there, one after another, thinking about my girlfriend and thinking about football practices that were coming. And all of a sudden, I see that the spinning tractor shaft has grabbed my pants leg, turning it into a knot, and started ripping it off my body, and went up my left leg, across my waist, and down my right leg, and in 3 seconds, my jeans were gone. All I had was a belt with fragments of jeans left on my belt. And this spinning tractor shaft just kept going as if nothing happened. And many years later, I thought about that moment where God saved me for whatever reason. And I thought, I didn't intend to dangle my jeans over that spinning tractor shaft. I didn't intend to dangle it over danger, but it happened. And if we're not intentional, we're going to dangle our kids over danger and not realize it. And that's what happens by default. I know it sounds like y'all are absolutely about intentional parenting, and that's the point, is we have to make, if I may, I think we have to make a decision. Mm-hmm. We have to decide that this is what we're doing, regardless of how our children respond, regardless of whether they follow in our footsteps or not, because God's the judge. I tell parents all the time, please don't take too much credit when your kids do great, and please don't take too much blame when they don't, because all you can do is make it easy for them to want faithfulness, but they're going to choose. So ultimately, I try to help parents realize some simple things, like how do you go from taking your passions that God has instilled in you, how do you turn passions into success? But more importantly, then, how do you turn success into significance? And even more important than that is, how do you turn significance, though, into faithfulness? And I'm a simple person, and the book does. It walks through, I call it 1, 2, 3 U, but it's how do you turn one passion into two forces of success, into 3 choices of significance, and ultimately to the real you of faithfulness that your children will want to emulate. So it really comes down to, are we choosing it, I think? But ultimately, are we giving them practical ways where they can understand how they can do this, right? Because one of the hardest things for children to grasp is, how could that become mine? Yeah, that's mom or that's dad's, but that's not me. And helping my children realize they are wired very different than me. Mm-hmm. Every one of them is a right brain, creative, fun, loving, present, fantastic person. Good old dad's a left-brainer, analytical guy. But every one of them has this incredible ability to turn their giftedness into a similar faithfulness expressed with their own uniquenesses.
Oh, that's so good. I bet it would have been really frustrating for you to try to make them like you, to see that as a measure of success. You know what I mean? It would have been really frustrating to go for that as an aim. But I think so many parents, and I have to catch myself and just be completely honest here. Like Will the Great sharing his stories, I'm going to share some of my stories. I have to catch myself in navigating my kids, because I look at them and there are times where I think, oh my goodness, I can't make them like me. not meaning affectionate, right? But I can't make them,
right.
You know what I mean when I say like me, right? And
Copy
so, but
you. Yep.
Exactly. So talk about that, because you address that in the book. I think many parents don't even realize that we're aiming for that.
Yeah, it really comes back to me realizing that my children didn't respond the way that I responded. I mean, I'm wired very much like my dad, and all of my kids are fantastic, but they're all wired like their mom. Praise the Lord, they are like their mother, I'm telling you. But ultimately, for each of them, I had to help them take their own journey. Every one of my children, and again, not to brag on my kids, but each of my children, when they were in their 20s, told me about the time when it was in their life where mom and dad's faith, not saving faith where they were going to get into heaven, but where their mom and dad's faith became theirs. And those moments as a dad, and again, I'll tell you one more quick story, is I had purchased this painting of a time where my son and I, the painting reflected a moment where my son and I were driving home from work, because it was Saturday. I had a little Miata convertible, cool little Miata. We were driving home, and the tornado's coming, and you can see this out in the distance, and there's just blackness everywhere. And my son said, Dad, he was so short, he was on his knees in the front seat of this convertible looking out, and he goes, Dad, look. And I'm going, what, son? He says, do you see the light? And I'm going, what are you talking about? And out in the distance, amongst all this darkness, was this little ray of light. And all I saw was the darkness. All I saw was the problems and the trying to get home before all this hit. And I bought a painting that's called Peace in the Storm. And it has this West Texas scene with all this darkness and this little bright light out in the distance. And I bought it because it reminded me of a time with my son that I need to see the light. I need to see where God is, not just the storm. And I overheard my son when he was 16, 17, talking to his buddy up in our bedroom for a reason, and I overheard him telling his friend, I'm the only kid that has a painting with Dad. And he proceeded to tell his son, his friend, about this painting and why I bought it. And why? Because I sat down with him and told him why I did it and what it meant to me. And here he is years later telling his fellow teenage friend about a memory that he and I had, not because he remembered it, because I kept telling him about the story of you just got to see the joy. You got to see the possibilities. And I'm anything but a perfect dad, but I mean, I'm probably like you. I'm trying. I desperately want to have that moment where I see my children receive the Lord's embrace, and as much as I can, I want to make that possible. I want to make it easy, knowing only they can choose it.
You know, Tim, I know that you want to make that possible for them. You are striving after this. You're encouraging us even as we're talking. But I know that you also want to make this possible for our listeners. So please share with our listeners, you want to get these practical guides into the hands of pastors and ministers all across this country. So share with our listeners what the Lord's placed on your heart.
Yeah, it's as simple as saying any minister in the country, I will be honored to give them a free book. If you're a minister, just go to my website, and there's no catch. Just give me the information so I can send you a free book. If you have a minister that has meant so much to you, give me their information, and I'll email them a free book. I'm not asking for anything. I just want to get this in the hands of the men and women in this country or beyond who are honoring us by serving us and our families. I've been a minister. I was one for a long time, and I can appreciate the special challenges there are of raising your own family. And frankly, for anybody, you can go to the website and get a free workbook to help you do these types of things. Because the point is, where do you start? And it's just another free resource amongst many to go there and just say, here's where I can start with my family, or honestly, with myself. Because the number one thing that kids need is they need to see you be faithful. And the best way they know how to love a Lord is for them to see you love your spouse. So these are practical ways to take everyday living and put it in the hands of people to hopefully help us all just be like what I'm trying to be, which is a far more faithful dad.
Amen.
Awesome.
Amen.
Awesome. So as both a church member and a pastor, what is the number one need you see in families today? Like what would you say is the number one need?
Well, this may not be what people would think, but I think it's for parents to lead themselves well. And there's so much to that, but I mean, there's so many things we need, but children need to understand it, but they need to see us trying. I say again, kids will forgive almost anything except a pattern of hypocrisy and a failure to try. When they're 30, 40 years old looking back, they're going to overlook all the other things, but what they need to see is for you to be doing and leading yourself well. And that's when all these other things are possible. If we lead ourselves well, then we have the credibility, and they see us choosing our treasures. They see us treasuring those choices, and they see us trying to pass it on. So there's so much more I'd like to share, but if you're asking one thing, I'd say, how do we lead ourselves as unto the Lord? How do we fall in love with the Lord every day like it's the first time? How do we do those things to where they see us living the Christian life? Not perfect, goodness gracious. But they'll forgive all those things. They really do. What they want to see is they want to see mom and dad or grandparents giving it our best before the Lord, because that's something that they could otherwise want to emulate in their own unique way.
You know, you're pointing out something that I try to articulate with our in my home, but also with friends in our church and stuff like that, because we do put a lot into our children as far as wanting them to understand the Bible, their faith, and, you know, just wanting them to know. But, man, we always talk about that their faith would be theirs, you know, and so that's so important that they would say, not because mom and dad brought me to church, but because, man, I love Jesus, you know, and they would have those experiences with God, you know, for themselves. And I think that's so important. That's at the heart of what we desire.
You know, I think it really begins with a recalibration in the way that we measure success as parents. There are many parents for whom it's true that when you start talking about the success of their children, when they're kind of catching you up, it's like 21st century America's wallet with the pictures in it. And the success is all like what they do for a living, or, you know, what kind of house they live in. But one of the things that's really grabbed me about this conversation today, Tim, is that you begin with the character shaping truth of the gospel that your children have received. And I think if we as parents can recalibrate and make that our aim, I think that we'll get better results. We got about 30 seconds. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'll give you one thought that's just changed my life and my family, and that is God measures success not by the comparability of our accomplishments, but by the completeness of our faithfulness. Our task is to be faithful. That's our job, and to help them want it for themselves.
You're going to want to get this book. Well done, Mom and Dad. You can go to timelba.com, timelba.com. Until tomorrow, Lord willing.
God bless.